Hi everyone. So today I've decided to tackle the long-awaited topic of the ingredient list. This is a topic that is triggering a lot of heated debate all over social media, and very often there is a very strong focus put on the list of ingredients by the pet food manufacturers on one side, and on the other hand the pet parents or people who are interested in trying to understand what is in the pet food that they are feeding their pets. So in this short video, we're going to try to discuss three things. The first one is, first of all, the list of ingredients is a legal document. There are constraints that are put in place by governments and regulators in each country. And therefore, it's very important for me to explain, first of all, to start with, what are those constraints in South Africa? And it might differ from country to country. This is very important to understand. Secondly, can we really judge the quality of a dog food by the list of ingredients? Yes or no? That's a question I will try to answer in developing a little bit more. And thirdly, can we judge the quality of dog food by the order of that list of ingredients? Remember, the list has to be ordered by order of inclusion. However, it gets a bit tricky, and I'm going to try to explain exactly how it works so that you can make your own opinion at the end of the video. And again, don't hesitate. If you have any question, you can just ask them in comments and I will gladly try to reply. So firstly, from a legal frame perspective, you need to understand each country has its own regulation when it comes to pet food. The list of ingredients when it comes to South Africa is compulsory to be mentioned on the packaging of pet food, and pet food manufacturers have to order the list of ingredients or categories by order of inclusion. In other words, what comes first is the ingredient or the category of ingredients that has the highest percentage of inclusion. In principle, it seems very simple. However, the regulation leaves two options in South Africa for pet food manufacturers. The first one is to use categories. For instance, so let's say cereals is the main ingredient in your pet food. You can use the category cereals, or you can break down that category into the actual cereal that you're using. For instance, maize, rice, sorghum, wheat, barley, oats. These are all cereals. So under one category is one option, cereals, and that can get to a high percentage. Or you can break down the detail of every single ingredient that would fall into that category. So you can very much have one category corresponding to one ingredient. You can have cereals and it's actually only maize, for instance, but you can also have cereals and you can have 6 or 5 components that are making up that category. So what is the implication for the consumer? There are pros and cons actually. A lot of people think that grouping ingredients into one category creates a lack of transparency. And to a point, I understand. If you have something that says cereals, or if you have the detail of maize, barley, wheat, etc., of course you can understand better what is in the food if you have the detailed list of ingredients. But what it does as well, by detailing the variety of ingredients belonging to one category, you split those ingredients and you scatter them through the whole ingredient list. And it can be very interesting if you want to manipulate that ingredient list. For instance, let's be clear about that. Pet parents do not really want to see cereals typically on top of the ingredient list. For instance, let's imagine that there is one category of ingredient that the pet market doesn't really want to see appearing too high in the list of ingredients. Well, so pet food manufacturers can split that category of ingredient, which corresponds more or less to the same type of ingredients, and nutritionally speaking, bringing the same type of nutrients, type of contribution into 4, 5, or 6 different items. And then the percentages are completely different. So let me take an example here about the grain-free foods, for instance. Grain-free foods, which are not using cereals in principle, I think that's the whole definition of it. They are using sources of starch that are not so apparent to the public. namely chickpeas, potatoes, lentils, this kind of ingredient. So when you formulate a grain-free diet, you still need a lot of these ingredients in contribution. In other words, if they were to be grouped in a category called pulses, for argument's sake, it would be the first ingredient in terms of contribution. So it would appear on top of the list. But the marketing teams of the companies producing and selling the grain-free foods, certainly they do not want pulses as the first ingredient. So what they do is they take that category and they split it up in 5 or 6 different items. Brown lentils, red lentils, green lentils, grey lentils. They go through the rainbow of colors that you can find lentils. And eventually the consequence is those 50% of lentils is split into any value between 5 and 10%, and all those ingredients mechanically they go down the list. So this is also a bit deceiving. So like I said earlier, on one end you gain transparency by splitting ingredients from categories to separate ingredients, but on the other end it allows pet food companies to create a manipulation around the order of ingredients. But this is what the law requires, and this is quite interesting. Another thing about the legal frame is that although the nutritional analysis have to be indicated on a dry matter basis which is consistent, you have to cap the dry matter level of your kibbles to 10%, and therefore you express the nutritional values on that 10% dry matter. Remember, if you were to add water, it would dilute the nutritional levels. If you were to make a kibble that's drier, you would concentrate the nutritional values. But surprisingly, you do not have to do this for the ingredient. So what the law requires that you include the ingredients that you use in your ingredient list as a pet food manufacturer by order of inclusion, regardless of the moisture level. I find that personally very deceiving. Let me give you an example. Again, a lot of grain-free food manufacturers are using this technique to manipulate the ingredient list and to shift ingredients up and down. What the public wants to see and what the public imagine is a sign of quality is to have a protein source on top of your ingredient list. So if you use an ingredient that is wet, that hasn't been pre-cooked or pre-dry or dehydrated before being used in the factory that makes the pet food, you are allowed to include it in the list of ingredients by order of incorporation on a wet basis. I find that very deceiving because if you actually remove all that water, which by the way is going to be removed in the process, because remember, to make kibbles you have to dry those kibbles completely. So whether it's removed before the mixing process or whether it's removed after the mixing process, it has to be removed. So the end result is the same. You end up with a kibble that is more or less at the same level of moisture regardless of the brand we're talking about. So to come back to my story, if you include a source of protein that is not cooked before being included in the cooking process of the kibble, it gets a bit complicated. Then you have to include a lot of it because it contains a lot of water and you're going to have to remove a lot of that water. I will give you a very practical example. You will see brands claiming 60% of meat or animal protein inclusion in their recipe. Well, this is based on a wet basis. So how does that compare to the actual nutritional contribution of that ingredient to the kibble that has been dried? Very little. Very little, because by removing water out of that high inclusion type of ingredient, you actually diminish its contribution to the whole recipe in the end. It is a bit technical, but I'm going to illustrate with an example. I'm putting on the screen right now a basic grain-free food type of recipe. So we would have 50% lentils, we would have 30% of animal protein, we would have 10% of fat, and the remaining 10% would be a mix of small inclusion ingredients and maybe some vitamins, some trace minerals, some macro minerals to complete the diet and balance it from a nutritional perspective. That's our starting point. If we declare the list of ingredients as I just listed it, as I just mentioned it, it would look like this. Categories, very unappealing to the market. Without changing the recipe at all, let's just split those ingredients into something more details, naming each ingredient one by one. And it would look like this. And already you can see it's a lot more appealing. But from a marketing perspective, there's something missing. Well, first of all, the top ingredients are not really sexy to the public. They are non-animal proteins. They are non-animal ingredients. So what we can do is we can split them. So we're going to split our lentils into the different color of lentils, as I mentioned earlier, and diminish the inclusion rate of all of them. Remember, the recipe does not change in the end. We'll still have our 50% lentils. We just split it into the different type of lentils. Nutritionally speaking, no difference, because literally brown lentils, green lentils, gray lentils, orange lentils, they're more or less all the same. So we do not change the nutritional value of the food. What we change is the way we're shaping our ingredient list. So this is already looking a lot better, because you've got now animal protein on top of the list, and the rest of the ingredients, they don't appear as so potent in the recipe, right? But we can do better than this. We can use wet ingredients, high inclusion levels. All we're doing is we're adding water to the recipe via ingredients that are very wet. And that water, we're going to remove it afterwards in the kibble manufacturing process. In other words, the equation balances. What you have brought on one end in terms of water is removed at the other end. So we do not change, once again, the nutritional quality of the product. And now you have an ingredient list that would look very sexy to a lot of pet lovers who might think they have a certain level of expertise making interpretation of ingredient lists. You can see it's quite simple to manipulate those ingredient lists. So be careful and be critical of what you see. There is something else that I would like to explain and discuss with you, is the way the ingredients are named, the way they are called. This is a professional lingo we're talking about. This is, remember, a legal document. And there's a whole definition of what you can call what that is accessible by pet food manufacturers, and they can choose and decide, depending on the ingredient that they're using, how they're going to name a specific product. It tells us absolutely nothing on the quality of the ingredient. It tells you absolutely nothing in terms of the concentration of the ingredient, in terms of protein, how much ash it's got, what is the digestibility of that protein, is there fat, what is the quality of those fatty acids. So some people want to see protein coming from chicken, from lamb, from ostrich. I respect that fully. I've got no problem with this, but what does it tell you in terms of quality? Very little. My point is, I think, for instance, a highly digestible chicken protein that is made of noble pieces of the chicken and coming from a country where antibiotics are not being used systematically in the farming process of chickens is a lot better than lamb coming from a country where hormones are used in the farming process, where antibiotics are used in the farming process, and where basically you also find a lot of wool and skin in that lamb that goes into pet food. So I want us to be careful about what we're talking about here. Species is not a guarantee of quality. There's a lot of other parameters that are impossible to describe in the list of ingredients. How do you assess that? Well, you must try to engage with the pet food manufacturers that you're dealing with and see their response, see how professional they are, see if you can access and talk to nutritionists easily. Because for me, this is really a criteria. We're not talking about veterinarian here, because their knowledge on nutrition is very limited. You want to talk to nutritionists about nutrition, because that's where the expertise lies. I hope you enjoyed the video. For me, particularly, it's a very interesting topic. I would like people to engage really, so don't hesitate to make contact. And I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.